Hey, you guys. Here we are once again with Flickers of Fear, and I promised that I was going to be doing more Giallo films in the early part of this year, just because I felt like I'd been neglecting them a little bit. So here's another one that we're going to talk about. Now, this is a film that was done by Dario Argento in 1987, and pretty, not universally, but pretty widely considered maybe Dario Argento's last great film, or at least, his last really, really decent one before things started to get a little hit or miss, let's call it that. I would probably agree with that, although he did do some good movies later on, which I will probably be talking about at some point. I actually really quite like The Stendhal Syndrome, which came out in 96, I believe, and he did one called Sleepless, which I remember being pretty good, although I haven't seen it in a long time. So he did have some good ones in there, but he also had some not so good ones in there. But, I mean, I think that most fans of Argento will agree that opera, while not up there with, Suspiria, Deep Red, Tenebrae, is definitely a really good Dario Argento movie and really, really worth watching. Now, the interesting thing about this, it's called opera in the U.S. I think in other territories, particularly in the U.K., it's called Terror at the Opera, but it's the same movie. And this has kind of like an interesting, I guess, history behind it. Now, this was the movie that he made after Phenomena, which I talked about not too long ago. The one with Jennifer Connelly talking to insects, and Donald Pleasance in the wheelchair with the chimpanzee. So there was that whole thing. This one seems like it almost... And I'm talking mostly about like kind of the coda, like the last 10 minutes of the movie. I kind of feel like it almost wanted to be in the same universe in a weird way. And I think initially that Dario wanted Jennifer Connelly, who had been in Phenomena, to be in this one as well, like as in the main role. But then he decided that it would probably be better to get somebody that he hadn't worked with before. So the actress that's kind of the main thing in this is actually named Christina Marsillash. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. She's a Spanish actress. And from everything that I've heard, and it kind of makes sense with like how the movie is, but she was just a very, very difficult actress to work with. Dario Argento said that she was the most difficult actress he had ever worked with, and coming from Dario Argento, that's really saying something. So the story behind this was that a couple of years prior to this movie being made, Dario Argento had been asked to stage a kind of a more, I want to say like a more horror or a creepier kind of like stage version of the opera. Now, I've seen some people say that the opera was Verdi's Macbeth, and I've seen some sources say that it was Verdi's Rigoletto, but it was one or the other. So Dario Argento was asked to stage kind of a more macabre like version of this opera. And while he was working on it, it's ironically... Everybody knew who Dario Argento was, you know what I mean? So I'm assuming that they brought him on to stage this because they liked his sensibility or like his visual style. So the fact that he came in and basically tried to horror it up or try to like goth it out or whatever, the producers were just like, no, we don't want to do that now, which, like I said, why did you ask him in the first place? Whatever. But so that whole entire project fell through. But because it did, he kind of got interested in the sort of behind the scenes stuff, like that goes into like staging an opera, and he wanted to do something with that. So he ended up writing this movie around it, which in a lot of ways, and I think that I kind of feel like Dario Argento, I don't think that his movies are necessarily all autobiographical to some degree, but he usually does kind of insert a little bit of himself or his own character sometimes in different, like he did it in Tenebrae, where he was I don't think the main character in Tenebrae was him because he was a killer, but a lot of the stuff, he's always kind of like putting stuff from his own life, like into his movies and sort of making sly, winking references to them. And this is definitely one of those cases because in this movie, it kind of centers around a sort of avant-garde production of Verdi's Macbeth. And the guy that's staging it in the movie is named Marco, and he is explicitly called out in the movie as being he was a horror director and we asked him to do this, and he had done Rigoletto prior and got really bad reviews for it because they said that he was making it too crazy or, you know, whatever. So Dario Argento is definitely like putting a little bit of himself, or maybe a lot of himself, into this role. And the character of Marco also gets accused of being a sadist at one point, like in the movie, and almost he's kind of like threaded throughout the movie is they're really trying hard to make you think that that Marco is the killer, so it's kind of like a red herring type situation. Sadly, the character of Marco, who is the stage manager, like this producer of the whole opera in the movie, was played by an actor named Iain Charleson, who had been in, I think he was in Gandhi, and he was in Chariots of Fire and stuff like that. And I don't think this was his last film role, but unfortunately, he was in a minor car accident when he was while he was making this movie. And while in the course of getting medical treatment, they discovered that he had AIDS, which he had suspected for some time. And he actually only lived a couple of years after this. I believe he died in 1990. So that's kind of like a sad, and it's interesting too, because it's almost kind of like this movie. It's like, anybody that works in, the theater or anything like that, or knows anything about that world, that Macbeth has long been considered like a bad luck play. So really anybody that puts it on, you're going to have all this bad luck like plaguing the production. And that's something that gets played upon a lot in this movie as well. But interestingly, when they were shooting this movie, there really did seem to be a lot of like bad luck shit going on too, including that car accident and like a bunch of other things as well. It was just kind of like, it seemed like for Dario Argento, even though the movie came out quite good, and actually this is visually, I love this movie. I think the visuals of it are my favorite thing, and I really like all that kind of like stuff that's set in the theater or set around an opera. So I really, really like the whole aesthetic of this. So this movie, I think, came out pretty fantastic, considering that Dario Argento apparently really, really did not have a good time making this and had to take a hiatus like after this movie was done because he just had such a terrible experience on it. Now, another thing too that is maybe like kind of comes from real life, like where he got the idea for this. Probably the most iconic image of this movie, and it was even used on the poster and everything, was of a woman with her eyes really big, and like there are a bunch of like pins or needles like taped underneath her eyes so she can't close them. And Dario Argento said he had the idea for this like before he made the movie. He's like, because I was joking with a friend of mine that I kind of like put all of this work and stuff into making these really like gory or fantastic like set pieces in my movies, only for people to go see them and then like look away. So he was kind of joking, I'd really like to be able to like pin needles underneath people's eyes so they had to look at it. So it was like a Clockwork Orange situation where he had his like eyes like forced open, so you'd have to look at it. So he kind of used that image or that joke that he made in the course of this movie. So what we have, as I mentioned, the movie revolves around a production of Verdi's Macbeth, done by a dude named Marco, who was previously a horror movie director. And he's doing kind of like an avant-garde, again, like a more macabre take on it. Although Macbeth is a pretty macabre play, I mean, to be honest with you, which is why it's my favorite one. But yeah, so that whole situation's going on. Now, at the very beginning, they have the star who's playing Lady Macbeth. Her name is Mara Kakova. And she's kind of like your typical, you don't really see her much because she was initially supposed to be played by Vanessa Redgrave, and her part was larger. But when Vanessa Redgrave couldn't do it or left the production or whatever, Dario Argento decided to cut the role way down, so you barely see her in the movie. At the very beginning, she's kind of having a big like diva sort of meltdown because of all the real ravens that they're using, in the course of the production that are kind of like whacking her while she's trying to sing and everything like that. And she gets all huffy about it and kind of storms out of the theater. in a really great shot. You actually don't see her. It's like a POV, but it almost looks like she's kind of like walking backwards, like out of the thing while she's like shouting at everybody. It's a great, like I said, visually, like the way the camera moves in this and like just the way the shots are set up. And it's just, the camera has this great like fluid sort of movement, and it's just, it looks fantastic and it looks really good, but it's not necessarily like distracting from the story. I think it's kind of like contributing to it or like adding to it, but it's just some of the ways the camera moves are like really, really beautiful, which I'll get into a bit later on, because there are some actually very, very famous sequences in this if you're into horror movies, particularly Italian horror. So our diva like storms out the door and pretty much immediately gets hit by a car. She's not killed, but you know, she's wounded bad enough that obviously she can't do the performance now. So then in comes her understudy, which is a much younger woman named Betty. Now, Betty's agent or manager is played by Dario Argento, who, you know, most people know. She and Dario Argento were a couple for a very long time. Dario Argento was also the co-writer on Suspiria and a few of his other movies, and was in his movies a lot. Now, at this point in her career, her and Dario had divorced or had split up 2 years prior to this, so she was kind of reluctant to do it at first. But, you know, because you never know what Dario Argento, maybe he's still mad. You don't know what he's going to do to you on the set of this movie. And indeed, something really bad does happen to her on the set of this movie. But from everything that I've heard, she actually wanted to do the movie because of her death scene, which is indeed quite spectacular. So maybe she didn't have any hard feelings about that. It's not a huge part, but so she plays, Betty's manager. So she comes to Betty's house and she's like, hey, you have an hour to get ready because, you know, the main lady got, you know, run over by a car. And so you're going to play Lady Macbeth. It's going to be, you know, this is your big break. And, you know, if you do really good, we'll go to Paris and Rome and everywhere. So Betty is just kind of like, you'd think she'd be kind of jazzed about it. But she's like, well, man, I'm really too young to play Lady Macbeth, you know, and plus Macbeth as a play, it's like it's bad luck. And she's like, I don't necessarily want this to be my big main debut and everything. But obviously, you know, they talk her into it, even though she's still pretty reluctant. So interestingly, so she gets there, she puts on the weird costume. I thought that for a minute, because I'm like looking at the production design of this opera within the movie, and it's obviously trying to be like an avant-garde, and I think it was supposed to be set during World War I want to say. Well, so you couldn't really tell from her outfit, because I thought she looked a little bit like an 80s glam version of like a flapper, kind of. But it was kind of hard to say like what it was because the costume was so strange. But then there was like a really quick shot of like a couple of soldiers, and I thought it looked like World War I uniforms. And that might be because the actual opera that Dario Argento in real life was going to do, I think was the Rigoletto, or it might have been Macbeth, and he was setting it at World War I. So I'm assuming that he just like carried over his ideas for the actual opera into the opera in the film's universe. So yeah, so she has like this weird outfit on, and she goes out and she sings and she's amazing, and everybody is just kind of like, oh my God, awesome. But during the course of her, you know, one of her, solos or arias or whatever, you see that there is somebody, your stereotypical Giallo killer, who has a mask and a black glove and everything, who's up in the one of the boxes and is watching her through binoculars and is saying some really creepy shit, like while he's looking at her. So you're led to assume this has also like a Phantom of the Opera kind of vibe, which is interesting because Dario Argento did a Phantom of the Opera adaptation a few years after this. I don't remember when that came out. It was like early 90s because I think his daughter Azia was in it. And I remember it being okay. I think it wasn't great, but yeah. But this definitely has Phantom of the Opera kind of vibes to it too, because it's a killer who is apparently obsessed with this young singer. And it seems like what he's trying to do is he doesn't necessarily want to kill her, but he wants to make her watch him kill other people. So what he'll do is he'll, she'll be someplace like the first death is happens in the thing, like during their performance, because like a light falls down and everybody flips out and everything. But then it turns out that somebody that worked in the theater that came up and like told the guy, hey, you're not supposed to be in here or whatever. And then he takes the guy and like smashes the back of his head into like a coat hanger thing, like on the wall, which is pretty gruesome. But then like after the show, Betty goes to her boyfriend's apartment, which I don't even want an apartment. It looks like a fucking castle or something. And he says his uncle or his dad or something is super wealthy and lets him use the place or whatever. And they're like, they tried to have sex, but it didn't work out. And, and it's a long story. And so he goes to make some tea. And while he's gone, the killer comes in, takes her and puts tape over her mouth, ties her with rope like to this pillar thing, and puts the pins or needles under her eyes so that she has to watch the killer killing her boyfriend, which he does in quite a gruesome fashion. He has like this really big kind of spade-shaped knife, and he just like stabs the shit out of him. So that kind of how it goes on. Basically every few minutes or every 10 minutes or whatever, she'll be someplace and then the killer will pop out and kill the person in front of her. So the killings in this are actually pretty brutal and pretty gruesome. As I said, her boyfriend getting stabbed is pretty nasty. There's actually one of the best shots, which I think might have been cut out of the UK version. It's probably been restored now. But when he first stabs the boyfriend, he takes this big ass knife and sticks it like right up here, like through his fucking jaw. And then there's like a shot inside of his mouth where you see like the blade coming out. It looks really good. But yeah, I think those couple seconds were taken out of the UK. But like I said, it might have been put back in there now. And then there's also another great sequence where she's in this kind of in the wardrobe department with the wardrobe mistress, whose name is Julia, and she Betty gets tied up and has the pins under her eyes, and she's put like in this sort of glass case or whatever, so she can't really do anything to help Julia as Julia is getting killed. Now Julia actually does like fight back. Like the killer like throws like a really heavy iron at her, which like hits her in her lower back and knocks her over, but then she kind of like struggles and picks up the iron and starts hitting the dude with it and knocks him out for a second. But then instead of just like beating the fuck out of him until he's dead, she decides she's going to take his mask off and see who he is. So this is not that long into the movie, so she takes the mask off and she's like, holy shit, it's him, but you don't see who it is. So then he comes back and like strangles her. Now the reason that he came in there was because he had lost like a bracelet of his, and it was kind of caught in Betty's costume that Julia was working on. So he came in to get it back. So Julia knew that he wanted it, so she was just trying to keep it away from him because she was just like, fuck you, bud, you're not having it. And so she gets killed and it kind of falls in her mouth. And so there's again another really great sequence where the killer is kind of like rooting around in her mouth, like with these big ass scissors, and he can't get it. So then he does, kind of an impromptu tracheotomy, like to get it out of there. So like I said, the killings in this are pretty brutal. Now, the best killing that everybody talks about, anytime you see anything about Italian horror, about Dario Argento movies, even about the best kills in horror movies, period, this scene is probably going to be in there. And like I said, this is Daria Nicolodi's big moment. This is like her death scene. There's this one scene later in the film where there's supposed to be a cop at Betty's apartment, but there's some kind of confusion over whether the cop is downstairs or whether, because the guy comes up into her apartment and like she thinks he's the cop, so he's in there. But then Daria Nicolodi's character comes over and she's like, no, there was a cop in the thing, and he said what his name was. And it's funny because this cop is played, his character's name is Daniele Soavi, and he's actually played by Michele Soavi, who, again, anybody that knows anything about Italian horror, he directed a shit ton of movies of his own, including Cemetery Man, which is one of my favorite ones. And so he worked with Dario Argento a lot and was in some of his movies as well as directing a bunch of his own. So he's in this. So there's some confusion over, well, shit, is the person in the apartment the cop or the killer, or who's outside? So we don't really know. So Daria Nicolodi is like looking through the peephole, like out at this dude, being like, "Are you really the cop? Prove it. Like, let me see, you know, your ID." And she's like, "Yeah, that could be a fake. Let me see your face." So she's holding her eye up to the peephole, and the dude basically just like sticks his revolver and shoots her through the peephole. So you have this great, it's just such a great sequence. It's fantastic. I love it. So it's just kind of like you see the bullet like going through, you know, the tube, like the peephole, and then it legit like goes in and then pops out the back of her head. And then there's a great shot from like a far shot from the end of the hall of her just like falling backwards in slow motion while the bullet kills the phone like that's behind there, like on this where the phone just like blows up like that. It's a fantastic fucking sequence. And I should say too, this movie was made in 1987, so they didn't have CGI to do that stuff. So they basically had to put like a little explosive charge on the back of Daria Nicolodi's head. So she was a little worried about it, as you would be. But I have to say, it looks great. I mean, it definitely looks like, it looks real. It really does look like a bullet going through her head. But yeah, so they definitely had to put like a fucking squib and all that kind of stuff on the back of her head, which I don't think they would do that nowadays, but but back in the 80s you kind of had to do it, and she was a trooper. She like went through it, and like I said, it's just the way it's shot is just a fantastic sequence. So as it goes on, you know, and Betty is having to be witness to all of these crimes that are taking place by this kind of gloved and masked killer, and you know that he has some kind of motive for wanting to keep her alive and wanting her to watch. And also kind of threaded throughout the movie, like, you know, scattered throughout the movie, are these sequences which you're not entirely sure. I mean, you're imagining they're probably flashbacks where, and I think that Betty says at one point too, she's like, you know, I've dreamed of this guy, like, you know, from when I was a kid, I dreamed of like a guy with a mask and, you know, and black gloves doing this kind of stuff with a woman tied up and, you know, watching someone else get murdered. So you know that there's some kind of like deeper thing going on there. So it turns out, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen this, and I will say, too, that this is a Giallo movie in the sense of, you know, it being like a murder mystery. But I will say that it's not a big secret, like, who the killer is, really. I mean, you can guess, like, pretty much from that. As much as they try to set up Marco as the killer, like the stage production, because sometimes, like, he'll turn up at a place, like, right after Betty's boyfriend gets killed, and then Betty runs out the fucking apartment and goes to a phone booth, like, to call the police and report it. And then suddenly, like, Marco just happens to be driving past, you know, hey, I was gonna go do this thing. And so and he's always kind of like around. So it seems like the movie's trying to set him up as the killer because he always seems to be conveniently around, like when the killings take place. But honestly, like, watching it, because I've seen opera several times, but I hadn't seen it for many, many years. So I couldn't really remember, like, what happened in it. I couldn't remember who the killer was. But honestly, pretty much as soon as the killer turns up in the movie, I'm like, oh, that's him. And indeed, that's how it turned. There's not really a lot of, because you know how in some Giallo movies there's like a shit ton of like red herrings, like there's like 7 different dudes it could be, you know, and 5 different ladies it could be. This one, there's not really a lot of, I mean, Marco is really the only one that's kind of like a main enough character for you to think that maybe it's him. But the fact that they're trying to set it up so much, that means it's not him. So there's really only one left. Because like I said, she does have a boyfriend, but he gets killed like almost immediately. So, you know, it's not that guy, obviously. So there's not like a big mystery. The killer is actually the cop, Inspector Santini. And like I said, pretty much the first time you see him, where he turns up, you know, at her dressing room, like after the performance, like to give her a flower and I'm a fan and blah, 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 you know that that's who it is. And indeed, that's who it is. Now, interestingly, Santini is played by Urbano Barberini, who was in he was in Demons 2, I think, and he was in like one other one that I'm trying to think of. But it's funny because I recognized him from Outlaw of Gore, which was on Mystery Science Theater. That kind of terrible, like, sword and sorcery movie that also had Jack Palance in it, like, in a silly hat. But yeah, so I recognized Urbano Barberini from that awful movie. It's an awful movie, but it's the Mystery Science Theater episode of it is like one of my favorite ones, just because there's so much shit to make fun of. But it's just funny. I had forgotten that he was in this, so like when I'm looking at him, I'm like, oh my god, it's fucking. It's Cabot, it's Cabot. But yeah, so I thought that was really funny. He was in a bunch of Italian movies, so I'm not shitting on him just for that one, but you know. So yeah, so it turns out that Santini's the killer, and the reason that he's doing it is because when he was a teenager, he apparently had this really weird, fucked up sexual relationship with Betty's mom, who was also an opera singer. Betty's mom apparently got off on being tied up and watching Santini killing people. But then what happened was that Betty's mom got a little too demanding, he says, so he ended up having to kill her. And but now that Betty's around, he's like, he wants to carry on the tradition, I guess. So I think that he thinks that Betty has the same perversions as her mom. So he's kind of like trying to awaken that in her, I guess, by tying her up and making him watch him kill people. So that's kind of like where this, and that's why, like, that's where the flashbacks come in, because the flashbacks were Betty is a little girl seeing her mom tied up and seeing this guy there like stabbing people in front of the mom, and that's what she's remembering, even though most of it is repressed. The way they catch him is actually quite cool. Remember at the very beginning I said that there was a whole bunch of ravens that were part of the production, and that the original the original woman that was playing Lady Macbeth, she was like pissed off about. So what ends up happening is that when the killer, before you know who it is, goes backstage to fuck with Betty's costume, all the ravens get out and they sort of like attack him, like, what the fuck are you doing in here, buddy? And so he kills like 2 or 3 of the ravens. Now there's kind of a line later on, like from the guy that's like the raven trainer, and he's saying, oh, ravens are really, really smart, and if you fuck with them, like, they hold grudges and they will remember for a really long time, which is absolutely true. Maybe not to the extent that you see in this movie, but it is based in reality. It's not a crazy idea. It is actually true. They do recognize people and they do hold grudges for at least a month, maybe longer. So how Marco decides to catch the killer before they know who it is that they said, well, we assume that this killer is obsessed with you, so we assume that he will be at tonight's performance. So what he decides to do is, in the middle of the performance, he's going to let all the ravens loose in the theater and let the ravens remember the person, like, and find him, and they'll be able to know who he is. And this actually works like gangbusters. Again, this is another very famous scene from this movie, because it almost goes into like Raven Cam, where it's just this great like swirling shot like around the audience in this beautiful fucking opera house. They used, obviously it's a real opera house, it's in Parma, I believe. And so they used this big, it's kind of like because I think, remember when I was talking about Tenebrae, where they have that really long like that Luma camera shot that just goes up the building and like past all the windows and stuff. This is kind of like that, but it's sort of like the next generation of that, where it's just kind of like this swirling sort of thing. And I read somewhere that Dario Argento, before he made this movie, he was really excited to work with this new version of the Luma that kind of did all the spirally like fluid kind of movements. So he actually took a job on a car commercial that was using that, just so he could like learn how to use it like for his movies and stuff. So again, it's like a really great, it's following the movements of the ravens as they fly all around the thing. And like I said, it's just this beautiful like fluid spiral kind of thing, and like everyone's kind of like ducking out of the way of the ravens and stuff like that. It's really cool. So the ravens all obviously land on Santini and pluck his eye out and eat it, so that's nice. But after he gets caught, like, he runs away, and then he ends up kind of finding Betty and trapping her in this room, expositing like all like what was going on with the mom and all this other stuff, like his motives. But then he's basically like, we're gonna die together now. So he has her tied up with a thing over her eyes so she can't see. Then he's like, well, I'm going to burn this room down, but I want you to shoot me first. But obviously she can't see, so she can't really do it all that well. So, but it does work out. She kind of shoots him, or so she thinks, and then the room catches on fire, but she can't get out. And so there's all this, confusion about it. But finally they get her out, and the dude looks like he's burned to death, and it looks like a happy ending. Now, interestingly... Okay, so what happened after that? Okay, what they wanted, this was released, in Europe in theaters. It was supposed to be released in the U.S. in theaters as well, but the American distributors said, we don't like the last 10 minutes, the coda of the movie. Can you please take that out? So it would have ended right where the killer supposedly burned to death, the end. Dario said, no, I'm not going to do that because I like the ending. So they were like, well, then we're not going to distribute it to the theaters then. So it basically just went right to VHS. Now, again, the last 10, 11 minutes of this are kind of controversial because after the whole fire and everything like that, so then you see Betty and Marco, and they've gone off to Marco's house, which is in the Swiss Alps. So again, you're getting a real Phenomena vibe here too, because I believe that was also filmed in the Swiss Alps. So they're kind of hanging out in the house or whatever, and then it comes over the news that, yeah, we thought that Santini guy was dead, like in the fire, but then it turned out that that wasn't even a body, that was a mannequin. So he had staged his whole thing. He faked his death, essentially. So so by the time that they see that on the news, Santini obviously has already found her in the Swiss Alps, so now they're like chasing around and everything like that. So Marco ends up getting stabbed, and Betty, to kind of get, I think she knows the cops are coming because she sees like a helicopter flying over. So she basically says over the body of Marco, she says, yeah, that's what I wanted to happen. I'm just like my mom. We're going to have this whole situation. We're going to have this whole relationship now, just like you had with my mom. You woke it up in me and blah, blah, blah. And he falls for it. So, because I think at first, like maybe some people were hearing that being like, wait, what? Maybe, because that was one way that they were going to let the script go, that she was actually like, yeah, I'm into this. Like, let you kill people and I'll watch. I get off on it now. So I think some people did think that maybe they're like, wait, what? That she actually is going to like team up with this dude now. But no, it was just a ruse, like to kind of throw him off guard. She ends up beating the shit out of him, like, with a rock or whatever. And then the cops come and take him away. And then there's a very weird sequence where Betty, I don't know, I guess it's meant to imply that she's just kind of like gone off the deep end because of all this trauma, which, like I said, is understandable, because she just basically starts crawling on the ground and being like, I'm just like, she doesn't want to hang around with humans anymore. She just wants to hang out with the wind and the trees and the insects and stuff. And then there's just kind of like, there's this little lizard and he's like stuck under a branch and he's like looking at her like, help me. And she's like, there you go, little buddy. You know what I mean? And she's like, you're free. And now I'm free. And she's all like that. So it's just like a really weird, like I said, so it's almost kind of like he wanted to tie this in with Phenomena in the sense that, now she's kind of like gone to nature because of her. I don't know if it was meant to imply that she had lost her mind completely or not. But that was the impression I got, but maybe not. Maybe I'm like reading too much into it, but I don't know. But as I said, this is generally considered Dario Argento's last great film. From 1987, and it's one that a lot of people don't really talk about all that much, which is kind of sad. Honestly, I really, really like this movie. I had seen it several times, but I hadn't seen it for many years at this point, and I actually watched it on Tubi. It's on Tubi for free if you want to watch it. Actually, a bunch of his movies are on there for free, interestingly. And I had forgotten how visually stunning this was. It's not as stylized as something like Inferno or Suspiria with these bright colors. It does have a little bit of that, but I think the main visual thing that I love about this one is the camera movements and the framing. I just think, like I said, that whole scene where Daria Nicolodi gets shot through the eyeball, like through the peephole, and then like that long shot of her like falling backward in slow motion, it's just gorgeous. It's a gorgeous shot, and it's just, there's so much beautiful, and even like some like the trick shots, or, if you want to go like pretentious film route or, Raven cam with like these swirling camera movements, as I said, it doesn't seem, it doesn't seem affected to me. It seems like it's all kind of a piece with the whole theme of the movie. Being very operatic, being, having all of this opera music in it and being kind of over the top in that way. So it doesn't really bother me. It doesn't really stick out. It really seems like it all works together really nicely. Just these kind of great tracking shots, and they're just so fluid, and it's just, I just love the whole movement of the movie. I think is like really, really cool. Again, I really like movies set around the theater, around operas, and this one, just, it's gorgeous. Like all of the staging and all the, it's just red curtains and these great big sets and like the beautiful opera house that they filmed in. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous movie. The production design and everything like that, really beautiful. As I said, it's not as hyper real or, super colorful like some of his earlier films. It is quite grounded in reality. It doesn't really have any supernatural elements to it, unless you want to call the Raven thing supernatural, which it's not really. Because, like I said, Ravens do actually hold grudges against people. They've done studies of that. So that's not all that supernatural. But honestly, I like this one a lot better than Phenomena. I just like the whole vibe of it. I like Phenomena too, but Phenomena is a little weird, where it's just kind of like weird supernatural stuff with like kind of all these zany elements in it. This one is much more like a traditional Giallo, but with all of those stylish elements that you love so much from Dario Argento. Will say I'm not a huge fan of the score. I like all the opera, and some parts of the score are good. I think it looks like Brian Eno did some of it, and I think Bill Wyman worked on it. But then there's a lot of, which I don't really consider this part of the score, but like during some of the kills, it's kind of like heavy metal or like hard rock, which I know he does a lot because he worked with, some other bands like that, particularly around like Demons and stuff like that, which kind of had a lot of punk and metal in it. It works in this one, I think, better than some of the other movies that he put it in, but I still don't love it. I kind of wish that he would have gone full on opera or a more like regular score than kind of doing these hard rock sequences like when the kills were taking place. But that's just me, because I know I've seen some other reviews of it and people really dug that and thought it worked really well together, and I guess it does. It works better than some of the other films that he's done that in, but I kind of wish that everything had been more like operatic. I think that would have been a lot better. But like I said, there is a lot of opera in this, which I dug. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, if you haven't seen this one, and if you like some of Dario Argento's other stuff, particularly his other Giallo movies, this one's not, it's not his best one, but it's still a pretty damn good one, and I feel like a lot of people don't really talk about it. So, if you've seen it, let me know what your opinion of it is. If you haven't seen it, you can watch it for free on Tubi, at least as of this recording. So go and watch it and let me know what you think about it in the comments. And that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.